Australia's housing crisis exists for one simple reason. Too many people want house prices to keep going up. Australia's median dwelling value is now $807,000 and the median weekly rent is $642. It takes 10.6 years to save a deposit for the median dwelling, and 50.6% of the median income is required to service the median loan. But we've all heard the statistics. Stories hit home much harder, and I think we can all think of at least one person who's had to move back in with their parents, or had to move into a place that's way too small, or had to move out far further away from the city than they'd like to live, or who's had to just move to another city altogether. The tragic thing is that politicians don't really care.
Our government's policies are not going to reduce house prices. We want house prices to grow sustainably.
Why don't you want to be seeing house prices drop? If you're a young person.
Well, that may be the view of young people. It's not the view of our government.
Too many people across our nation have a vested interest in keeping housing expensive, and our country is going to burn for it. Before I continue, massive shout out to my monthly Patreon supporters. And on that note, I'm doing a 50% Patreon membership sale. Perks include early video access and merch discounts. Use the code BETTERHOUSING to obtain this discount. If you're able and willing, your support would be so greatly appreciated. Australia is about to vote on whether to give current Prime Minister Anthony Albanese another term, or hand the keys to the lodge to Liberal leader Peter Dutton. Even if you're watching this video after the 2025 election, I'd still recommend giving it a watch. Sadly, this video is probably going to remain relevant for a long time. So, how do you solve the housing crisis? Simple economics dictates that a crisis of expensive goods is either caused by an excess of demand or a limit of supply. You either need to reduce demand or increase supply to bring prices down. Both Albo and Dutton have come up with both types of solutions. Demand-side solutions reduce the number of people who can buy homes in Australia. Dutton's plan to cut immigration falls in this category, with a vow to only allow 240,000 international students into Australia each year. Look, I've already made a video about why immigration is so important, but even ignoring that, I just don't think immigration is high enough that a cut will sufficiently shift the paradigm. Less migrants should bring prices down, yes, but it isn't going to magically bring Sydney's median from $1.65 million to, say, $500,000. Another demand-side solution proposed by both sides is a ban to foreign investors for at least 2 years. Obviously, I hope this helps, but only 1% of homes were bought by foreigners in the 2023-24 financial year. Supply-side solutions act to increase the number of homes in Australia. Albo's $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund is one such example, which plans to build 40,000 social and affordable homes over 5 years. Thing is, in a country of 27 million, do we really consider just 10,000 such homes per year to be enough? Then there's Albo's National Housing Accord, a vow to build 1 million homes across Australia in the 5 years from 2024, and reward states that build more than their fair share with a slice of $3 billion. The first issue here is that there are rewards for exceeding the limit, but no commensurate punishments for building too little. And that's a problem because of the second issue. Australia is currently expected to fall 462,000 homes short of the goal by 2029. The National Housing Accord is failing, and states are not going to be held accountable for that. Next is Albo's recent campaign pledge to build 100,000 homes reserved only for first-home buyers. It's probably not enough homes, but I do admit that this one is more reasonable and should at least theoretically help. Finally, there's Dutton's $5 billion housing infrastructure program, which over 5 years will fund water, power, sewerage, and access roads for new developments. Trouble is, delivering these things already costs about $43 billion a year. $1 billion is a pathetic drop in the ocean. But if you think these solutions are bad enough, wait till you hear about the secret third category of solutions. The let's just make everything worse solutions. Albo's $6.3 billion Help to Buy shared equity scheme will loan eligible buyers 30% of the price of an existing home, or 40% of a new one. This will be open to 40,000 buyers over 4 years. Not only is 10,000 people a year nowhere near enough, But this scheme does nothing to increase supply or reduce demand. Instead, it focuses on increasing the number of people who can buy homes. And by increasing demand, you increase prices. Then there's Dutton's Super for Housing plan. This will allow people to gain early access to their superannuation of up to $50,000. I really dislike this one. Superannuation exists purely for retirement. Sure, owning a house is very important if you want to retire comfortably, but you still need liquid assets. You're basically just blowing that money up and shifting the housing crisis onto your future self. Short-term gain, long-term pain. And once again, this scheme does nothing to increase supply or reduce demand. It will just inflate demand and then prices. And then there's the campaign promises. Albo wants to allow first-time buyers to only need a 5% deposit. If you increase everyone's purchasing power without increasing supply by enough, you just push prices up, and you make their mortgages bigger and more crippling. And Dutton wants to allow first-home buyers to deduct the interest of their mortgage from their taxable income. That just allows people to take on bigger mortgages, once again pushing prices up. There are a lot of do-nothing solutions. That's the point. The federal government loves increasing buyers' purchasing power, even though that's known to just drive up prices. It's downright negligent. But why? Why do they do this? Well, see, here's the thing about Aussie politicians. They want to have their cake and eat it too. They're searching for the magic bullet. Everyone wants a way to solve the housing crisis without bringing house prices down. I'm not speaking rhetorically. Labor's outright admitted it.
We want to bring house price growth into something sustainable.
Why don't you want to be seeing house prices drop? Because if you're looking to get into the market, if you're a young person looking at what's ahead of you, you definitely want to see house prices come down.
Well, that may be the view of young people. It's not the view of our government.
Minister, if house prices don't come down, doesn't that mean that this system is stacked against young people, that it's just not going to work for them?
Sure. And Dave, we may have a difference of view about this. I have a strong view. Our government's policies are not going to reduce house prices.
This is essentially an admission that the government have no interest in actually solving the housing crisis. It's deplorable. It makes my blood boil. But can you blame them? 66% of Australian households own their own home, with or without a mortgage. These people have a vested interest in house prices rising. These people will be very upset if politicians do anything to jeopardize their wealth. Australians use houses to store their wealth. When you buy a car, you just buy a car. There's an understanding that cars will depreciate. Resultantly, there are exceptionally expensive cars that the working class could never afford. But there's also cheap, second-hand cars that a young adult who works hard for a few years could feasibly buy. This is how a market should work. Houses aren't like this. People view them as assets, and so they appreciate. People buy houses with the specific intention of using them to generate income. You buy a house. You sit on it for a few years, accrue capital gains, and then voila, you've made yourself a healthy profit by doing almost nothing. You then flip that house, pay off the rest of your mortgage, and use whatever remaining profit there is, likely a lot, to buy yourself a more expensive house. Rinse and repeat. By the end of it, in all likelihood, you have a nice, large home to leave to your family. Maybe you've even built up a portfolio, one that nicely sets you up for retirement, and that could one day be given to your kids. I don't want to demonize Aussies that engage in this process, because so many do it, including likely some of you. They're simply playing the game as it's been laid out for them. Do we blame the players, or do we focus on the system and the people who created the game in the first place, and then sat on their hands willingly for decades doing nothing about it? There are plenty of people still living in homes they bought in the 70s for 20 grand. They've seen their houses go up exponentially, so obviously I don't feel bad for them if house prices go down. But what about the people who took out a $1 million mortgage last year? What about the people struggling to make mortgage repayments after endless interest rate hikes over the past 3 years? These homeowners are still luckier than non-home owners and renters in many ways. But, how could I not sympathize with these people? They've managed to battle their way into the housing market, and regardless of how, the last thing they want is to be paying off a $1 million mortgage on a property suddenly only worth 600 grand. So, to avoid aggravating a great proportion of the population, pollies like Albo do everything they can to just dance around the problem. And who can blame them? You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And one man stands as clear proof of that. Negative gearing and capital gains tax. These both frequently get blamed for deepening the housing crisis. But what are they actually? First, negative gearing. Say you just bought a unit for $500,000 to rent out. You're renting it out for $400 a week or $1,600 a month. But wait, your mortgage repayments are about $2,422 a month. You're making a loss of $822 a month or about $10,000 a year. Too bad, so sad. What can you do about it? Well, it turns out a lot. You can claim that $10,000 as a tax deduction. What? That's not how a tax deduction should work. There's also the capital gains tax. Let's say you bought your home for $800,000 5 years ago. You've now paid it off and sold it for $1.4 million. That's a profit of $600,000. Well, that's obviously part of your income for that year, as it should be, so you gotta pay tax on it. Or do you? If you've owned that house for more than 12 months, you get a 50% discount. Yeah, you only pay tax on $300,000. Then if that house is your main residence, guess what? You don't pay any capital gains tax. None of it. Zero. Zilch. Also, if you move out of your main residence and rent it out, you can still treat it as your main residence for CGT purposes for up to 6 years. Sell it and then still pay nothing. Honestly, it's been made so easy to reduce or eliminate your CGT that if you're actually paying 100% of it, you need a new accountant. Negative gearing will cost Australia $100 billion over the next 10 years, and capital gains $65 billion. That's roughly $16.5 billion in lost tax revenue every single year. Additionally, negative gearing at least benefits primarily wealthier Australians. While making up 5% of all taxpayers, they make up about 25% of all negative gearing or losses. The abolition of negative gearing would make property investment less viable, removing some property investors from the market. And the abolition of the CGT discount would reduce the cash in hand that property owners receive when they sell, reducing their purchasing power for their next property. There you go. You've just reduced demand and hence reduced house prices. Granted, economists estimate that such a fall may only be 1 to 4%. But honestly, just because its effect is minor doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Also, $16.5 billion a year is more than all the proposals both sides of politics are making combined. That's money that could be used to fund other solutions that actually work. Thing is, one politician did try to reform these regressive tax concessions. Bill Shorten, the former leader of Labor, made tax reform a huge part of his platform at the 2019 election.
A first home buyer couple goes along on a Saturday to an auction and they're competing against a property investor who's getting a government subsidy to make a loss.
It wouldn't alone solve the housing crisis, but it would be a huge start. The Australian public said no. Resoundingly. It'd be silly to say Bill Shorten lost the election just because homeowners like their tax breaks. Bill Shorten was never very well liked by the public, but it certainly played a role. Young people have reason to genuinely be terrified for their future. I'm a student at UNSW. People who go to uni generally skew higher socioeconomically, and yet even so, not many people live near uni because the rent near uni is just way too expensive. Sadly, it's either a brutal commute or struggling to pay hundreds of dollars in rent each week. As a result, people barely go to uni, and while UNSW still has plenty of social life, it's certainly hampered by this. Late night drinks with friends can't go for too long, because everyone takes an hour or longer to get home, and trains end around midnight. And that's if your friends even have the energy to hang around after a week of long commutes. I know, these are first world problems, but they're emblematic of deeper issues. Sydney's nightlife isn't as bad as people say, but I always think it'd be far better if more young people could actually afford to live close to the city. Tragically, the youngest parts of our workforce often live so much further from the city than their older counterparts and retirees. An analysis by KPMG found that the inner city suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne lost roughly 2.5% of people aged 20 to 64 from 2019 to 2023. And that's just scratching the surface. There are 33 suburbs across inner Sydney where not a single police officer, firefighter or paramedic lives, with essential workers slowly being priced out of the inner suburbs and forced out west. And then there's school capacity. So many schools in inner city Sydney LGAs like Bayside, Strathfield and the inner west are under capacity. Meanwhile, so many schools in outer city LGAs like the Hills, Camden and Blacktown are well over capacity. If schools are a reasonable metric by which the youth of an area can be determined, then Sydney is failing. The beating heart of our workforce are being forced to live far away from employment centres because older homeowners and retirees are not leaving the more accessible but expensive parts of our cities. And residential uplift in these areas has been woefully inadequate. Sydney lost 70,000 people aged 30 to 40 between 2016 and 2021. The Greatest Sydney Productivity Commission infamously warned last year that Sydney risks becoming a city with no grandchildren. That omen stands most true for Sydney. But no city is immune. Albo and Dutton make a big deal of their working class upbringings. That frustrates me. Yes, they have every right to be proud of how far they've come. But there's a callousness behind these stories. They both grew up during the peak of the Australian dream, where you could come from nothing, work hard, and become truly rich. Now, you pretty much need to be born into the right family. You generally need to have parents who will lend you money to enter the property market. We're basically an inheritocracy. That's tragic, and our politicians are complicit in it because they genuinely want house prices to keep going up. I've discussed some solutions in this video today, but increasing supply has to be one of the most effective ones. It's not a silver bullet by any means, but if you flood any market with supply, prices go down. Any new supply should be aimed at inner city neighbourhoods, which I've explained at length in past videos. Not only are these the places closest to jobs, services and amenities, but they're also the places that are aging out. It makes the most sense to bring a huge uplift in density here. The Transport-Orientated Development Program in New South Wales and the Activity Centres Program in Melbourne are two schemes aimed at doing just this. Sadly, NIMBYs always stand as a big obstacle to any densification plans. In response to new apartments in Leichhardt, someone declared, "We're all too old to care about kids or schools. We just don't want more people." In response to new apartments in Crow's Nest, residents are concerned their homes will fall in value and ruin the peaceful nature of the area. In response to new apartments in proximity to Barangaroo Metro Station, the local community group have whined that it still blocks views from Balmain and Piermont, apparently prioritising views over people. Plans to turn Rose Hill Racecourse into a city due to it sitting right above a metro line have been rubbished by racers, who have essentially said it's not their responsibility to solve the housing crisis. And of course, let's not forget my old buddy Vincent, who, when asked how his dislike for apartments in Haberfield might impact the housing crisis, simply said, "I hadn't really given that much thought, actually." Okay. So a good counterpoint to these is that a lot of these NIMBYs are protesting against new market rate housing. And fair enough. New apartments in, say, Crow's Nest will easily go for over $1 million. Hardly affordable. But it's still far more affordable than the median house price. Then there's the whole concept of moving chains. But finally, I have a strong feeling those NIMBYs would be complaining, even if it was all public housing. Residents in Riverwood signed a petition condemning plans for a 3-storey senior social housing block, declaring it would devalue their homes, disrupt their peaceful neighbourhood, and force them to always keep their curtains drawn. This one in particular makes my blood boil. Opposing public housing for the disadvantaged is just heartless. To be clear, I'm not suggesting all NIMBYs are acting in bad faith, but this isn't an isolated example. It's bad enough that it's next to impossible for young Australians to buy a house anymore. It's made all the more worse that many older Australians who benefited from some of the best market conditions in history and bought homes back when a house wasn't an asset now insist on protesting any new development on their street. These examples all paint a picture of a population quarantined from the difficulty of younger Australians, apathetic or even oblivious to our struggles. They've apparently decided that allowing a family to live closer to the city, allowing parents to get home from work sooner to see their kids, letting people share their beautiful inner city areas, isn't worth spending an extra 5 minutes in traffic or seeing a few new faces. I'm not suggesting every NIMBY is like this. Supply denialism is very real, but we see endless proof that supply reduces prices. Suburbs in Sydney, including Warwick Farm, Punchbowl, Sydney Olympic Park and Westmead, and suburbs in Melbourne, including Melbourne CBD, North Melbourne and Carlton, all stand as proof that an oversupply of property will precipitate a fall in prices. This scares people. I looked up half a dozen articles to find these stats, and pretty much every single one framed a fall in prices as a problem. Take this house that sold in Campbelltown, 50 kilometers from Sydney CBD, for $1 million. The article said the neighbors, the owners, everybody was so happy. That kind of joy makes me uneasy. Sure, you're sitting on a jackpot today. But what happens tomorrow when your kids need to buy their first home? Your windfall becomes their burden. And if you don't have kids or they've already made it, well, who's going to staff your hospitals, pour your coffees, protect your streets, drive your trains, upkeep your amenities when the entire working class is priced out of Sydney and eventually every large Australian city? Australia has made a religion out of property. The fact that the third least densely populated country in the world is in a housing crisis is not only laughable, but should be a source of national shame. I honestly don't think we can even begin to start solving the housing crisis until the moment that Australia, our politicians, and our homeowners all accept that house prices need to come down. This will hurt our economy, simply because of how much Australians have invested in property. But the alternative is scarier. Hollowed-out cities filled only with the elderly. A society where inheritance means more than hard work. A country where families are forced hundreds of kilometers apart. And the economy will crash, only harder. To solve the housing crisis, someone needs to lose. Surely it should be those who actually own the roof over their heads. If I was Prime Minister, how would I solve the housing crisis? Tax reform is an obvious first step, but it's not enough. I still haven't brought up Australia's shocking construction industry. It's lagging behind terribly, and it's responsible for some truly shoddy builds. Punishments for poor workmanship need to be stronger, and more needs to be done to attract people into the construction industry. Thing is, the construction industry relies on market certainty, and that can only be established by creating more capacity for more homes. Coaxing the states with money isn't enough. We must mandate upzonings in our inner cities and around public transport nodes to create more sites for development. Where necessary, local councils that cannot come up with compelling reasons to not build housing must have their planning powers stripped. This is a housing crisis. Councils need to stop rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Mandating larger apartments with 3 or even 4 bedrooms is also essential to make dense living genuinely viable for families. Skepticism towards the private sector, the people who stand to gain the most from building more housing, is totally reasonable. So the public market must also play a role. Using the $16.5 billion yearly that tax reform provides, and any extra that we can muster, a strong public developer must be established, and the number of public and affordable homes in this country dramatically increased. Look at Singapore. The majority of that country live in public housing, and citizens get somewhere to live for well-subsidized prices. We should be inspired by them. But again, none of this can really happen until the day we accept that a house should not be an asset. Too many people want house prices to rise forever. If we don't fight it, that greed will burn this country to the ground.